And
Learning a new skill. How cool is that?
I love, love, love the color scheme in your home, in your office.
Thanks.
It's like your entire selfhood is sepia. That kind of range of browns and stuff.
Browns and grays.
Hmm.
It's not bad.
So I haven't gotten it yet, so I haven't read it yet. But
Good
I
or either. It's either. Has your mail come today?
well, with what they did to the mail service, that so what I'll ask you to do is kind of give elevator speech about the book.
Sure. I can do that. You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
So the premise behind 46, you know me, the first question I ask is, what if? And so the question rolling around in my head, starting in around 2017, around 2018, was, how do we come back from this place where we're so divided and so polarized? What kind of advice would I give if I were still in politics and still in government and still advising politicians? What advice would I give them to find a way back from this place that we've gotten to? And then, of course, it started rolling around in my head, and it became more like, okay, so if I was the president, what would I do? Um, and from that sprang this character, Emma McMasters, who is badass and a former governor of New York, and who is a lesbian and has a big tent. And, her main premise is e pluribus unum, out of many one. And that, united we're stronger and we can do this. We can do this, but we have to have a big tent. We have to listen more than we talk. And so I started rolling her around through my mind. What would she be like? What was her background? What was her personal story? And I really also wanted to pay homage to all the women who have served in the military in this book. I have no military background whatsoever, but I have many friends who do. And so I started thinking, I want two really strong female characters. I want two glass ceiling breaking women who are going to pave the way. And I need this book to be a love letter to all those people who need to heal from what's happening in the world. And this was before COVID and before any of that, but during the reign of 45. I'll call it the reign of 45 because I will not use the name. So,
Yes, I really am pleased by that.
yeah.
It could be
So,
like Voldemort or something.
exactly. Exactly. You're exactly right. So, so I created the secondary character. She's not really a secondary character, but the second primary character, let's call her. And her name is Palmer Estes. And she's a 4-star general. There's been one female 4-star general who was Anne Dunwoody, who retired a few years ago and who was not a lesbian. But I created this character, Palmer Estes, to pay homage to all of the women who have served in the military with such honor and such dignity, and with the hope that there will soon be a lesbian female 4-star general. And so I thought, under what circumstances would these two women be in each other's orbits? How would this play out? How would this work? And that became the genesis for the story of 46. I wanted it to be a political book, and I wanted it to be a love story, because I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. Somebody in an interview yesterday asked me the question, am I a feminist? And I said, yes. Yes. And then they asked me, they said, but you write romance. So are those things?
What, feminists can't be in love? What?
That was my exact quote. I said, what part of those things are mutually exclusive? It doesn't, you can be a feminist and still believe in love and believe in romance. Those things are fine together. You don't have to be, some strident, um, prunish human being. to be a feminist. I mean, I think that we need to look at what our definition of feminism is, if that's what we think. You know, these are strong characters. They break glass ceilings. They don't take any prisoners. And yes, they fall in love because love is the most powerful force in the universe. How many times have we talked about this? And, so love gives you strength. It doesn't make you weaker, it makes you stronger. And the fact that you believe in love and you believe in romance doesn't make you any less a feminist or any weaker. It actually, I think, adds to your character and bolsters you. So anyway, that I digress. But that's where 46 came from.
So, it's been several years, but in my mind, it's only been like a blink of the eye. You fell in love with somebody fantastic and who I adore and think is like brilliant and funny and amazing. And you're like, yeah,
I would give you a hug, by the way.
yeah, yeah. You're like, yeah, that's my wife.
That's my wife.
Um, so what is it like to write and be in love and be married and, share a life with someone?
It's wonderful. No, why wouldn't it be? The biggest adjustment for me, I think, because I wrote, 12 books by myself when I was alone. And then I've written 4 since then, I think. For me, the biggest adjustment was my schedule, trying to recognize the fact that I can't, when I write, it affects someone else in the house. So, whereas when I was single, I, might write until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't do that anymore. I sort of set a writing schedule so that I'm on time, so that I'm present when I should be present. But beyond that, I mean, it's the wonderful experience of feeling supported, so that we sit down at the end of the day at the dinner table, and it's what have the girls been up to? The girls being my characters. Oh, you wait till you see what happened today, and it's really nice to be able to share that and to bounce ideas and to say I'm stuck, and to have someone say no, you're not. you know on our long walks up and down the mountain, because we live on top of a mountain, we'll talk about what are the pinch points, where are we, what are the possibilities, and all those kinds of things. So I feel wonderfully supported, and that only makes the process so much easier for me. And being in love, of course, you're writing about romance. It used to be that I was writing about the things that I longed for, right?
Hmm.
The things that I chose, that I wanted to manifest in my life, and then they manifested. And now it's like, well, I can't possibly write how marvelous it is. So I'll give you the best approximation I can on the page.
Hmm.
So that's what it's like.
So, because this has to be like our eighth interview together, something like
At
that.
least that many. I can't believe that there's a question you have left in your mind to ask me.
Well, as a woman who flies by the seat of her pants and is very tangential, external processor, ADD, I have a myriad of things. So, to put some context, circling back to your book in a way,
Mm-hmm.
talk about your early career in government.
Mm-hmm. Sure. This book, 46, came from a deep well of experience that I have, both in the media and in government and politics. I have, as you know, I was press secretary of the Senate Minority Leader, the Democrats in New York for a time. I was the spokesperson for the New York State prison system, the third largest prison system in the country. I worked very closely with Governor Mario Cuomo, the original Governor Cuomo, I call him, on his campaigns. And, I lobbied Congress. I have been in Washington and in the halls of, the Capitol and the White House many times. So what I did was distill all of my experiences and the things that I know about the mechanisms of government and the way things work, and the processes, in addition to, just the emotion and, those intangibles. And I sort of put those things all together. And then I reached out to my friends, who I've made along the way in government and in other places. And I asked them to help me fill out the details just to make sure that I was absolutely accurate in this book. So my early experiences, I went into politics from the media. I just essentially say I went from being on one side of the microphone to being on the other side of the microphone. As press secretary, it was my job essentially to be the mouthpiece for the Senate Democrats, to be their voice and to be the contact person for the media and so on and so forth. So, and I've written a fair number of speeches or pieces of speeches for politicians along the way, which came in very handy when writing Emma's acceptance speech of the presidency and then her inaugural address, which was a lot of fun to write. So I took all of those kinds of early experiences of being in the room when decisions were made, of understanding, the nuances of policy and of government and of how things really work in Washington and, on the state level and on the federal level. And I sort of married those to my writerly self, my imagination, and created out of whole cloth a presidency. So, those early experiences, I learned a lot when I was in politics and government. I went in very idealistic about the things we could do and the changes we could make. And then I learned how things really work. And that changes you in some fundamental way. Remember that at the time I was in my mid-20s. And so when I got inside government and I saw how policies came to be made and laws came to exist and what kinds of compromises were made along the way to get things done, it became hard to unsee all that. And to stay as idealistic as I was. I mean, I was a firm believer, and in some level I still am, that, the right things happen for the right reasons. But what I discovered was more than the right things happening for the right reasons, generally speaking, the right things will maybe happen, but not necessarily for the reason that the public thinks they happen. More often it's because there's a trade-off someplace behind the scenes. It's one legislator or president or governor making a concession on something else that this person wants in order to get this done. It's horse trading in many ways. And in some ways it's, it's soul sucking because you have to give away things that were important to you in order to get something that's more important to you or more importantly, more important to your constituents. So I took those kinds of experiences, having sat with many members of Congress, with many members of the U.S. Senate, with presidents, with governors and U.S. senators, state assembly people in New York, and I sort of wove all of that into a larger experience. So it was very helpful to have been where I've been, and I've worked on campaigns. So for me, talking about Emma's election and the result of their campaign work was easy too. I don't spend a lot of time in the campaign. The book opens with her acceptance speech on election night, having won the election, actually on election night, by the way, not 2 days later or a month later, but on election night. And so, without my personal experience, this book would have been a lot harder to write. It certainly would have been a lot more fanciful and not quite so fact-based or not quite so reality-based, for sure. Helpful.
So the OG governor had a different imagination on what glass ceiling you were going to break, and you didn't decide to go in that direction when it came. I think you were going to be a sports newscaster. That's something that he imagined for you. But your life changed when
Governor Cuomo, yes.
Yeah, the OG, like the original guy. And if you could just tell me, what that experience was like, and also how you came to be what is now like a prolific author.
For me, I was so young and so naive in some ways. Even though I'd been in, some very important positions, I was really naive. And in my private conversations with OG, meaning Mario Cuomo, we had played sports together, he and I. He would invite me to the mansion, and we'd play one-on-one basketball in the driveway of the governor's mansion. A little surreal, you know. And we played 3-on-3 with his son, Andrew, who at the time was, you know, a young guy, who is now, of course, governor of New York himself. But, you know, we played basketball. I played softball, which is, you know, where he first came to understand that I was an athlete. And he really felt like my future should be in sports and in sports broadcasting, because I actually was a woman who knew so much about it. And there weren't that many back then. You're talking in the early 80s, early mid 80s. And so he really wanted to push me in that direction. And here's where the naivete comes in. He said to me one day, I think you should be a sports broadcaster. I'm going to talk to my friend Larry King at CNN about it. Me, in my naive head, I'm thinking, you can't do that. You know, he doesn't know me from a hole in the wall, and I need to earn this, and I haven't earned it yet, I don't think. And, you know, so I sort of poo-pooed the idea and said, you know, yeah, I don't think that's, you know, going to work out, because I didn't think, honestly, that the governor of New York had the power to get me on the air as a sports anchor at CNN. At the time, ESPN, I think, either didn't exist or was very early in its infancy. I can't remember which. But in any event, I didn't think he was serious. I thought that he was full of it, you know. But he was very serious, and I think he was a little bit offended that I didn't jump at the opportunity. And I didn't jump at the opportunity because I really felt at that point, as a young woman trying to make it, trying to break glass ceilings, that I needed to do that on my own merits. And so I turned down his help. I turned down the help of the governor of New York to talk to Larry King on my behalf to be a sports broadcaster. And that's how I lost out on that opportunity. And it's one thing that I've actually looked back on in my history and thought, God, what a dream job that would have been. I could have gone to games for free. I could have seen everything. And it changed the trajectory of my career, you know, more towards.
If you could give like the short version of how you went from fanfic, you know, click the publish button, to prolific lesfic writer.
You know, I didn't know, again, this is another case of naivete in a sense. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. Friends coerced me into writing this piece of fanfic that I called The Price of Fame. And they told me where to upload it after I had written it. And they had looked at it, you know, given it an editorial review. They said, upload it at a place called the Academy for Bards. And so I did. So I uploaded it on Labor Day weekend, 2003, I think it was. And it went viral. What we would today, I mean, who knew the expression go viral? It didn't exist then. But today we'd say, that went viral, and really shocked the heck out of me. That led to me going to a conference called BardCon later that year with these same friends in Washington, D.C., where I was introduced to a publisher who said, I want to publish your book. And I'm like, what book? You know, The Price of Fame, this thing you wrote, I want to publish this. Like in a book? Book, yes. So that's how, at the moment when I became a published author, they agreed to publish it. The Price of Fame became a trilogy, and then later 4 books so far, right, with Final Cut, which came out 10 years later. But the trilogy was The Price of Fame, The Cost of Commitment, Value of Valor. So this little thing that I wrote that I just, you know, did to shut my friends up and to prove to that I could do it, turned into a publishing career. And I've been publishing ever since.
So there was a very special night many years ago, and I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, I may or may not be remembering correctly, in GCLS New Orleans, was that when Ann Bannon gave you the Ann Bannon Popular Choice Award?
Yeah, that was New Orleans. You're right.
And you shared that honor with Sandra Moran. Can you just talk about, from the moment you heard your name to the moment where you're standing with someone so extraordinary?
Sure. What an experience that was. Um, the Anne Bannon is just a remarkable human being. First of all, just the kindest woman you ever want to know. But I mean, Anne Bannon is considered largely the mother of modern lesbian fiction. Her series, her Bebo Brinker series, paved the way for the rest of us. We all stand on her shoulders. And so to receive such an award is just remarkable. And to receive it in person from her herself, only the second time I think she'd been physically present to present the award, I couldn't even have imagined it. I did not expect to win that night. The book that won was one of your favorite books, All That Lies Within.
Oh my God, I love this book.
I knew you were going to say that. I'm so glad you have so much love for that book. I do too.
Yeah, but because I forgive you for like shredding my soul with like I think it was Eyes on the Stars.
Uh-huh.
And I went to your reading you did at Stonewall with Trinity and Nell.
Dark, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I tried to talk to you, but I kept breaking out in tears. And one moment, because the person who was filming it kept on turning to film me, and she was about to film me like for the third time, weeping, and I'm like, please don't, please don't, because and I tried. What was interesting was when I finished that book, my best friend Jackie, we've been friends since high school. And one of the things that we always did together was go to movies together. And we were sitting waiting for the movie. And for the life of me, I tried to explain how shaken I was. And I was, when you're like crying and you can't make sense. And I really wanted to share with somebody like just how heart wrenching it was. But I mean, it's accurate and it's real, and you're telling stories that need to be told. But whew, did you break my heart?
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to break your heart.
But you made it up to me with many other books.
Well, thank God I got back in your good graces.
Oh my God. And the thing is, like, I don't want to discourage people from reading it. It
No,
just was.
in a bad way. I didn't break your heart in a bad way.
No. It was, a beautiful story. The ending was unexpected and unusual. If you could give like the elevator speech for that book, and then to close out our interview, I want you to give a message of connection, peace, and love, to put some positive energy out of the universe before we say goodbye.
Sure. Ask the question one more time.
To describe the inspiration and not spoiler plot line. And then to close out our interview, because one of the things that you do,
the research for Eyes on the Stars.
Yes.
Gotcha. Right. That's
and
correct.
The end bit is you make a very conscious decision in social media to be a purveyor of light.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a very deep spirituality and have, psychic abilities and whatnot. And so what I want to leave our viewers with is a message that is uplifting and kind of carnivency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I got you. So Eyes on the Stars, which is a historical book about the women Air Force service pilots in World War II. A real organization that existed, but that was classified until 1977. The impetus for writing that book and the research behind it came from the fact that I was a history major in college and I had never once heard of these women, the women Air Force service pilots. And I was appalled by the fact that I didn't know they existed. Here was 1,072 women who flew the same planes the men flew in World War II and never got any credit for it. And so I set about to learn about them and to find out about their lives. And I actually got to meet a few of them, which was very extraordinary. Most of them are gone now. But at the time I wrote that book I think it was 2010, there were 300 of them still alive. And I mean, their story was an extraordinary story. And you see 1,072 women or 1,034 women, and you think, what are the chances that none of those is a lesbian?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about it, no. So,
no fucking way.
yeah, exactly. When we think about it, no, exactly. So, so I set about, as I do with every historical fiction book I write, to write us back into history where we've always been, but we haven't always been recognized. And so it was very important to me to get the research right. There wasn't a lot out there at the time. I actually connected with a woman whose mother was an Air Force service pilot, and she was doing a project called Wings Over America or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was all about preserving the memory of the WASPs. And so she had done a bunch of oral histories with them, and I poured through those, and I went out and I actually saw the planes they flew, the World War II vintage planes that they flew in person, and talked to people about how to fly them and how it would work and all of the things they went through. And one of the women who I met, who was an women Air Force service pilot, had been shot. She crashed her plane 7 different times, and still she went back up. These women were so heroic. It was remarkable to me. So I did a lot of firsthand research. I read a couple of good books, which I cite, I think, in the acknowledgments of that book as well. And I was very, very honored and excited to tell this story that so many people didn't know about. And the thing that got me started on telling the story, where I wanted to start the book, was these women in 2010, just as I was about to write the book, were finally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by President Barack Obama at the insistence of all of the female members of Congress, which was great. And so I thought, well, the book has to start here, and then I'm going to work back in history, take them back to the beginning, which is exactly what I did with Eyes on the Stars. And yes, I wanted it to be a realistic story. I needed people to understand how it was for women of that generation who, couldn't be out like we are, wasn't safe, and what their lives were like. I wanted it to be realistic and honest and emotional in the sense that their lives were emotional. I wanted people to really connect with these characters and feel like they knew these people personally. And the fact that you bawled your eyes out tells me that you felt like you knew these women personally.
Oh my goodness. It was, one of the things that you're very talented is expressing vulnerability. And, a lot of it was very raw, but it was real. And honestly, life is hard. Life was hard for them. And just as you're writing them back into history, you have to write in the hard stuff in order for it to be good. And like you've not only done that with that, but what was the name for the one that your friend Dot?
Bright Lights of Summer.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking of like that movie that came out. I'm like, no, that's not it. So what I want to do, just closing out, is, I want these interviews to be uplifting, and you're really good at connecting, emotionally with people. So if you could just give a little, you're already looking into the camera, like, anyway. But just express something you think needs to be expressed right now.
These are hard times. These are challenging times. These are unprecedented times that we're living in. But I see so much that gives me hope, so much for the future that gives me confidence in the next generations, and even in our own resiliency. We've experienced much in our lifetimes, but we've never experienced something like COVID-19. And we've never experienced a like we're experiencing now. And the tumult, not just here in the United States, but in the world at large. This is what I would call one of those pivot points in history. And it will determine who we are and who we become. But one thing that I have come to believe, and I believe it with all my heart, is that all of this, in some sense, will lead us and is leading us to a stronger place, a better place, where we are stronger as individuals and where we value the things that we should be valuing more, the things that we've taken for granted, the things that we need to change now are obvious to us: systemic racism, kindness, democracy. These are values we hold dear. And now we've seen that they are not things that we can afford to take for granted. It's up to each of us to play our own part to make the world a kinder, gentler, better place. And I believe that coming out of all this, that's exactly what we're going to do. We've seen what needs to be changed. We've seen what needs to be done. And now I think we are more resolved than ever to make sure that those things happen. And, this period of time, which may seem so dark, and in many ways has been so dark, has been all about shining light. When we shine light, it shines away all of the darkness. And each of us as individuals, as we stand up and speak out, are shining light. We're shining light, we're spreading love. And as we do that, as we emerge from this cocoon, if you will, from this cocoon of darkness, we're going to emerge into a period that I believe will be so bright that we'll need shades to navigate.
The thing that I think of in terms of historical context is we needed Hoovervilles to make FDR. We need, I have the stats that Elizabeth Warren is not our president, but her spiel about systemic change, like she has a plan for that. Like that's what I want to see in this world. Like I understand the reason why Biden was chosen as a standard bearer. I get it. But in terms of just Elizabeth Warren is my kind of radical. She's incredibly kind. She's very insightful, and she's a wonderful person. And maybe one of these days I'll bump into her. I want to thank you for our millionth interview together. It's been a really good time.
We should pop champagne or something to
celebrate
our millionth episode.
Right? It's just so funny. I literally cannot think of how many we've done. I can't even kind of like, I'm like, I started off with the Liz McMullen show, which was like kind of a podcast radio show. I interviewed you for the Author Studio, which was not the author,
the Author Salon.
Yes, I'm like, it's been so long, but it was modeled after the Actor Studio, where everybody would be asked the same questions and obviously give varied answers. And that was an honor of my life because I was able to interview such extraordinary people. And you had your hoodie on that had Bright Lights of Summer. Is that the title? I'm entering my senior moments phase, I believe. I mean, I'm 44, but when it comes to my memory, it's starting to. So
get to be 60.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you have is you're very, very physically active. You're very fit, and it's important to you. And I think that is good brain food.
True.
I knew I had something to say. Oh, okay. So, what's really interesting for me, because I know you so well, I was able to kind of curate our experience so that I could kind of make a tight interview, because we're, a little over 30 minutes, and, people have short attention spans. And I just wanted to showcase these kind of things and create some positive content for the world because we need it.
God bless you, because we need the Liz McMullens of this world to do exactly what you're doing. I mean, this is what you're in charge of a screenshot, by the way, because I don't know how to do that on my Mac. So you're in charge of that and sending it if you'd be so kind.
Sure.
But Yeah, it's I'm so glad you're back. I'm so glad you're doing this. It's so critical to, you know,
What I realized was, and it was the idea was gifted to me by another extraordinary trailblazer, Lee Lynch.
mhm.
And like she had this series called the Amazon Trail, which is kind of, it was, it's kind of what people consider a blog these days. And there's a level of continuity that records history. And I feel like I am a Coggan historian, for our people, our stories.
And a great one at that. I mean, that's just, it's what you do. You you give people context, you know.
Yeah. And it brings me joy. So,
Well, that's nothing like that. I mean, right now, isn't that what we all need? Is just a little bit of joy, right?
yeah, and I consciously think of what I put out in the world. And I pay attention, like I love a lot, the movie reviews that you give with your wifey. I like your posts because they tend to be uplifting and give context in a time that's so uncertain. And so I'm really excited to share this interview. Today is November 25th, 2020. And I'm so glad to have had this time with you once again.
Me too, sweetie. You be well. Best you know.
Yes. So I'm going to stop